I was 36 the night I realized I was nothing more than a shadow at my family's table. It was my mother's birthday, another dinner under the heavy chandelier in her dining room, the one she insisted made the room feel elegant. The table was full, as always. Laughter bounced off the walls. Clara, my younger sister, sat across from me, hair curled just right, voice rising with a story about her latest Instagram brand deal. Everyone listened. Everyone laughed. I served. The wine. I am Elena, the eldest daughter, the quiet one, the one who gets things done without being asked, and rarely thanked. That night, Clara wore Nana's locket, the one she'd promised to me, the one Nana gave me in a trembling hand just before she died. "This is for you," she whispered. "You're the heart of this family, Elena. Don't ever let them make you forget that." But I had forgotten, or maybe I never believed it, because when I saw that locket glittering on Clara's neck, I froze. She wasn't supposed to have it. Stared at it, at the way it caught the light. I whispered across the table, low enough that only she could hear. "You sold it." Her smile didn't even falter. 10,000, funded my launch video. And just like that, Nana's final gift to me, my symbol, my inheritance, was gone. My mother, Margarita, raised her glass. To Clara's courage, she's making something of herself. And me? I disappeared into the background. As I'd always done, I grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina, in a beige house with creaky floors, burnt-out porch bulbs, and the smell of overbaked casseroles lingering in the kitchen. My childhood was not tragic, just muted. My mother barked orders. My father read his paper. Clara twirled and sparkled. And I made sure there were napkins on the table. I was the invisible scaffolding holding it all together. When we were kids, Clara screamed louder when she wanted things. I didn't. When we were teens, she rebelled, stole the car once, skipped school for a photo shoot. I cleaned up her messes. When we became adults, Clara became the entrepreneur, and I was the helper. I'd organize family dinners, run errands for my mom, edit Clara's brand bios because you're good with words, Elena. They called me dependable, reliable, which is family code for forgettable. Let me tell you about Christmas, not the magical kind. Just 4 years ago, I spent the day hanging lights around the windows. I used a hot glue gun to fix a broken angel ornament my dad refused to throw out. I made rosemary potatoes from scratch. Clara showed up in a gold sequin sweater, posted 3 stories before dinner, and sat down just as Margarita was raising her glass. To Clara's 75,000 followers, my potatoes went cold. I smiled, of course. That's what I do. Smile and fade into the corners of the photo. I'm not even in half of them. That night, my father passed me in the hallway. He muttered, "Tree looks nice, Elena," then went back to the game. That was all I got. The real heartbreak, though, was Nana, my mother's mother, the only one who really saw me. She lived with us for the last few years of her life. I brought her tea, read to her when her eyes got tired. We'd sit in the sunroom and she'd tell me about her garden from back in Brazil. She called me Mi Solzinha, her little sunshine. Clara came by once a week for selfies. When Nana passed, she left me the locket. It was her mother's, gold, worn smooth, with a tiny sapphire in the center. I wore it every day for 6 months. Then it was gone. My mother said, "Clara's starting her own business. She needs something special for the launch. You're not really into jewelry anyway." I stood there holding a cup of tea I'd made for her, like a damn servant. I said nothing. That was my talent. I work at the Raleigh Community Center, a job no one in my family takes seriously. I organize book fairs, poetry nights, art workshops for seniors. My office smells like coffee and paper. It's not glamorous, but it's mine. Sometimes, after events, I sit at my desk and write poems. I have a leather notebook I don't show anyone. Not even Lila, my best friend who runs the used bookstore next door. She's the only one who asks me how I'm really doing. She's always nudging me. "Elena, why don't you submit something? You have a voice. But I didn't feel like I had a voice, not one that mattered. Still, I kept writing. About cracked teacups, wilted flowers, and women who disappear while smiling through dinner. Clara's engagement party was the final straw for a while. I planned the whole thing. Vineyard venue, string lights over oak trees, a table full of macarons color-coded to her Instagram palette. She wore blush silk and took 300 pictures. I wore black and managed the music, the guests, the parking. A woman approached me near the dessert table. "Excuse me, do you know when the caterer leaves?" I was the maid again, not the sister. Margarita toasted to Clara's vision and ambition. No one mentioned me. That night, I drove home with the leftover cupcakes in my passenger seat and cried in my car outside my apartment. I didn't want pity. I just wanted to matter. One night, after a particularly brutal family dinner, I sat in Lila's bookstore while she closed up shop. She handed me a cup of jasmine tea. "You okay?" I shrugged. She didn't press. That's why she's the only one I can stand to talk to. "I think I'm done," I whispered. Done with what? Trying to be heard, trying to be seen. Maybe disappearing is the only way. She looked at me over the rim of her mug. "Then disappear loud, Elena." That was the seed. I didn't scream. I didn't confront anyone. I started to plan. I'd need money, so I skipped Starbucks, patched my shoes instead of replacing them, and said no to helping Clara plan her influencer retreat. I used the time to draft something new, a poetry curriculum for women, a 6-week workshop. I pitched it to the centers, director, and waited. She said yes. It started small, just 5 women in folding chairs, writing about old wounds and quiet rage. But it grew. Word spread. Soon we needed 2 sessions. Something in me woke up, something that didn't need permission. Clara's brand was crumbling. I stopped editing her copy. Her posts grew messy. Too many hashtags, misspelled captions, tone deaf, reels. Sponsors ghosted her. She called me crying one night. I stared at the phone, then turned it off. Margarita called the next day. "Elena, Clara's struggling. She needs your help." "She'll figure it out," I said, calm, steady. "You've always been the mature one." Exactly. And maturity meant knowing when to leave the table. The slights didn't stop at dinners. Last spring, I poured every ounce of energy into organizing a community book fair. It had taken me 4 months to convince the director at the community center to greenlight it, and another 2 to coordinate local authors, small publishers, volunteers. My living room was a war zone of printer paper, paper clips, poster tubes, and coffee cups. I designed the flyers myself, stayed up folding programs until my fingers cramped. The day of the event, I wore my navy blouse. Clara always said it was too plain, and stood at the welcome table, greeting every guest with a warm smile, even though my armpits were soaked. Clara showed up halfway through, a breeze of perfume and noise. Her heels clicked loudly across the cobblestones, and she immediately made a beeline for the crowd near the author's tent. I watched as she posed for selfies, gave a short flashy speech to her phone for her Instagram story. Supporting local creatives, love this energy, and left without even stopping to say hi. That evening, Margarita called. Saw Clara's story. How wonderful. She's really doing her part for the community. I just stood there, silent, as always, at a family barbecue last summer. I was the one flipping burgers, a dish towel slung over one shoulder, sweat running down my spine. Clara lounged on a pool float, giggling into her phone, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. David, our father, handed her a soda, ignoring the tray of burger buns I was trying to balance while wrestling the grill lid closed. Clara's, "Gotta shoot tomorrow," he said with a chuckle, like that explained the hierarchy. Later, I found my poetry notebook open on the counter. A water ring stained the cover, and a pink sticky note was left on top. In Clara's loopy script, it read, "Cute hobby, that's all." My throat clenched, my face burned, and I closed the notebook slowly, gently, like it had feelings too. The only person who saw me unraveling was Lila. Lila owned the small bookstore next to the community center. She always smelled like lavender and wore mismatched socks. Her store had fairy lights dangling across the windows and a bell that chimed softly when you walked in. It was the only place that felt like mine. One evening, I sat with her in the back room, both of us cradling steaming mugs of peppermint tea. "You're carrying too much, Elena," she said, her voice low and deliberate. "You give so much. When do you get to shine?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. I stared at the tea's surface, watching it ripple, and the silence between us held something sacred. I wanted to say everything. The poems, the locket, the aching silence at dinner tables. But I didn't. I nodded, swallowed it, and went home. Still, her words stuck. A seed. And like all things buried deep enough, it started to grow. It was a humid morning in June when the final line was crossed. Not with fireworks, not with a scream, but with a simple text. I had stopped by Clara's apartment to drop off a box of clothes she had asked me to donate from her overflowing closet. It wasn't unusual. She always handed off the tasks that required patience or effort. She wasn't home, of course. Her apartment was sleek, filled with clean lines and expensive minimalism. I never quite understood how someone so chaotic managed to curate such a perfect shell. That's when I saw it. Her jewelry box. Open. The velvet lining inside was the same shade of plum as the one Nana had kept on her dresser. Inside Clara's, the compartments were neat, almost surgical, but one was empty. My heart thudded. The locket. Nana's locket. The one she had pressed into my palm as her last act of clarity. The one she said was mine. Gone. I stood there for a moment, silent. Not angry, numb. Then I picked up my phone and texted her, fingers trembling. "Where's Nana's locket?" Her reply came less than a minute later, casual, like she was responding to a brunch invite. "Oh, that? I sold it. Traded it. Actually. Got $10K. Didn't think you'd care. Didn't think I'd care. $10,000. For a piece of memory. For the only thing I had from the one person who truly saw me." I sat on Clara's gray suede couch and stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Later that night, I called Margarita. She picked up on the third ring, breathless like she'd just come in from watering her plants. "My, did you know Clara sold Nana's locket?" A beat, then a sigh. "Not surprised? Not outraged. She needed the money, Elena. You weren't using it. You're not the flashy type." "I wasn't using it?" My voice cracked on the word. "You don't understand, Querida. Clara has influence. She can wear things that matter, get them noticed. You just keep it in a drawer." I felt like I'd been slapped. It wasn't about the locket anymore. It was about every casserole I baked, every party I planned, every chair I stacked, every birthday I remembered while no one remembered mine. It was about being told I wasn't enough, just softly enough that I could almost convince myself they didn't mean it. That night, I sat on my couch, rain tapping the windows, my notebook open on my lap. The poem I was working on had a title, Broken Chains. It wasn't finished. Neither was I. Something in me went still. Not angry, not sad. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes right before a decision. I called Lila. "I'm done," I said. "I'm done being the one who holds them together." She didn't ask questions, didn't ask for details. She just said, "Then build something for yourself, Elena. I'm here." I didn't slam doors. I didn't yell. My silence became strategy. The next morning, I walked into the community center like I always did, but with a new purpose. I pitched a poetry workshop to the director, something I'd kept tucked away in the margins of my notebook for months. I expected hesitation. Instead, he leaned forward, his eyes lit. "That's exactly what we need," he said. So I began. After work, I stayed late designing lesson plans. I sketched out exercises on imagery and metaphor. I pinned poems to corkboards, arranged chairs in soft circles. My little corner of Raleigh began to change. Quiet women came in with tense shoulders and left with pens in hand. their stories unfolding line by line. At home, I stopped answering Clara's texts. Need help prepping for this collab. You're good at this kind of stuff. Can you review my pitch deck? I replied once. Can't. Working late. That was all. She didn't take the hint. She wasn't used to silence from me, but I wasn't just ignoring her. I was redirecting everything they took from me into something I could finally call mine. I canceled our family brunches, skipped Sunday dinners. Margarita started calling more frequently. Elena, you've been distant lately. Clara's going through a lot with her brand launch. I paused, then said, maybe she should learn how to manage it. There was silence on the line. She didn't know this version of me. I started saving. Every dollar. I stopped buying my usual coffee. Wore the same sweaters from last fall. I called it my escape fund. At night, I researched places that felt like the kind of peace I'd only read about. Monterey kept showing up. Windy coastlines, independent bookstores, a town where no one knew my name, and that finally felt like a gift. One night at Lila's bookstore, I read her a new poem, one about an empty kitchen chair and a dinner that never truly included me. She looked up, blinking fast. Elena, you can't keep these to yourself. I shook my head. They're not ready. No, she said, sliding a business card toward me. You're ready. It was a contact at a small literary press. They specialized in debut poetry collections. That night, I sent my manuscript under a pen name just in case. My heart pounded as I hit send. A week later, Clara's brand launch imploded. Her posts were inconsistent. The press kits arrived late. The catering company canceled last minute. She called me, frantic. Elena, I need help. Mom says you've always been the organized one. I almost laughed. I replied, busy, you've got this. The event was a disaster. Her influencer friends bailed. Her followers roasted her blurry photos and off-color lighting. This doesn't even look like your vibe anymore. What happened to Clara? I watched from a distance. I didn't enjoy it, but I didn't intervene either. Margarita called next. Clara's struggling. You need to help her, I answered calmly. I think she'll figure it out. She didn't respond. That was the first time I'd ever told her no. And still, I kept building. My workshop grew. Women came back every week. They started reading their poems aloud, their voices shaky, but brave. The center buzzed with stories and soft rebellion. It became my sanctuary, and theirs. Meanwhile, my manuscript was accepted. I cried alone in my kitchen when the email came through. They titled it, Whispers of Salt. It felt perfect, like my voice had finally found its current. Lila framed the email. We hung it in the store, right beside the poetry shelf. And then, one afternoon, Clara emailed the wrong person. A PR manager at a major fashion brand replied all to an old chain, not realizing I was still on it. Clara's event was poorly executed. We're moving on. She lacks leadership, unprofessional. It should have stung. Instead, I sat back, tracing the rim of my mug, and whispered to no one in particular, not my problem. I bought a pendant to mark the moment, a concha shell carved in silver, a quiet thing, a reminder that I belonged to the ocean now, not to them. Clara's downfall wasn't loud, but it echoed. Her once polished posts turned sloppy. She forgot to add captions. Her lighting was off. Her once slick stories were filled with awkward pauses and half-hearted sponsorships. Comments rolled in, "You okay? Bring back the old Clara. What's happening with your page?" She tried to pivot, book giveaways, skincare reviews, but nothing stuck. Her charm had always been curated by borrowed hands, mine. And now, she was alone with her ring, light and fading ring of followers. I didn't gloat. I didn't even smile. I was too busy moving. I found a listing in Monterey, a cottage near the cliffs, walking distance to a bookshop with chipped paint and a porch swing. It was too small for a family, too old for tourists, and perfect for a woman like me. I called. I applied. I was approved. I didn't tell anyone. Kept teaching at the community center while I packed in secret. I wrapped books in old sweaters, folded poems into journals, boxed up the Locket's empty place in my life. I told Lila over chamomile tea. "You're really doing it," she whispered, nodded. "I'm leaving Raleigh." She reached across the table. "You're not running away, Elena. You're arriving." That night, I wrote my final goodbye letter. Not to them, but to the version of me that once waited for a chair at their table. Next morning, I left before sunrise. No tears, no texts. Just the sound of gravel under tires and a heart finally quiet. I left a note taped to the fridge back home. "Don't look for me in the house. Look for me in my words." I moved into the cottage the next week. The Pacific wind howled outside like it was cheering. The sea was rough, untamed, like I felt inside. I painted the walls myself, hung fairy lights on the porch, read poetry to the ocean, hoping the waves would carry the words somewhere I'd never dared to reach. The bookstore down the road put my book in the front window, Whispers of Salt by E. Marin. Strangers came in asking for it by name. They told Lila, "This poet. She writes like she's been invisible and finally cracked open." One woman cried in the aisle. "This one," she said, holding a dog-eared page, "this one is me." That was all I ever wanted. Not applause, just recognition. And then, the night of the reading. Lila had organized a small event in her store. Wine, cookies, a mic, and folding chairs between poetry shelves. I wore my navy dress, the one Clara said looked too plain, and tied my hair back. The crowd filled. Up fast, locals, artists, curious neighbors, women who had underlined every stanza, and, unexpectedly, my family. They came. Margarita, clutching her purse like a lifeline. David, with his coat too warm for coastal air, looking smaller than I remembered. And Clara, dressed in a shade of yellow. That didn't suit her anymore. They stood near the back, waiting, expecting, I think, to finally hear my voice. But I wasn't there. I had asked Lila to read. She stepped up to the mic, smiled, and opened the book. The first poem was the one about the empty chair, then the one about Nana's hands, then the one about being left out of every photograph, but never missing the pain. Lila's voice was soft, steady, the kind of quiet that forces a room to lean in. And my family, they heard it all. Every line, every sting, every metaphor that wasn't really a metaphor at all. Margarita's eyes welled up. David stared at his shoes. Clara looked lost. She didn't record anything. Her phone stayed in her lap, forgotten. One woman in the crowd said aloud, "God, this is real." And another whispered, "How did we never hear of her before?" That was my moment. Not a standing ovation, not a reunion, absence. They had to sit through my truth without my body shielding them from the burn. That was my revenge. Not violence, not cruelty, just clarity. After that night, I never heard from them directly again. Margarita didn't call. Clara didn't post. David didn't write. Not a thank you, not an apology. Just silence. And that was fine, because silence had always been mine. This time it was theirs too. A few weeks later, Lila showed me an article. The Monterey Chronicle had published a review of Whispers of Salt, a haunting debut about being unseen and the quiet power of walking away. E. Marin's voice is one of restraint, grace, and contained fury. I folded the paper carefully and tucked it into my journal. The second printing sold out within a month. Women from all over the coast started sending me letters. They didn't call me author or celebrity. They called me mirror. Some wrote about mothers who belittled them. Others about siblings who stole everything but were still loved more. Some just wrote, "Thank you for saying it. Now I can too." I began teaching poetry classes full-time at a local women's center. My students were shop clerks, retired teachers, single moms. I gave them prompts like, "Write the moment you disappeared," or Describe your grief like it's a room you've lived in. And they wrote, God, they wrote. Pages and pages of rage and love and longing. One woman, Ruth, read a poem about her husband leaving after 40 years. Her voice cracked. She said, I've never said this aloud. And the room clapped. Not loud, just long. That's what I wanted my life to sound like. Back in my cottage, the ocean grew louder each week as winter rolled in. The sea glass on. My windowsill caught the light just right in the mornings. I drank coffee from my chipped mug and wrote new poems about healing, not just loss. Lila brought me a frame one day. Inside, she'd placed the original cover of Whispers of Salt, and beside it, a small silver concha pendant she'd found in a vintage store. Your symbol, she said. I hung it above my desk. It reminded me, I was never just the glue. I was the mosaic. One morning, I received a letter. No return address, but the handwriting was familiar. Clara's. I hesitated, then opened it. Elena, I've read your book. Twice. I didn't know you carried all that. I didn't see it. I didn't see you. I'm sorry. I'm launching a new brand and I could use your eye. Would you consider helping? I'd pay you fairly this time. Please think about it. See, I folded the letter neatly, slipped it into a drawer I rarely opened, and never answered. I didn't hate her, but I didn't owe her my magic anymore. That part of me was no longer for rent. Margarita, I later heard, had left the book club. Too much talk behind her back. One woman had brought my book to the circle and said, I think this is about you. David sent one more email. Elena, I always knew you were different. I should have said something. I'm proud of you. Dad, no love, no warmth, just late recognition. I archived it without replying, because pride that comes after abandonment is not pride. It's guilt wearing makeup. If you've ever felt like the seat at the table wasn't really yours, if you've ever had to walk away to be seen, then maybe you already understand. They never saw me until I was gone, and honestly, that was the point.